Welcome to episode 40 of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast, bringing strategic workforce planning out from behind the eight ball. I'm joined by my brilliant co-hosts Alison Ettridge and Toby Culshaw from Lightcast for what turned out to be an absolute masterclass in strategic workforce planning. In Toby's news roundup, we dug into the results of the TI Collective's One and Done Challenge, where AI-generated talent intelligence reports showed both incredible promise and, unsurprising but concerning, hallucinations. We also covered Saudi Arabia's ambitious Skills Week, 8,500 skills mapped across 12 priority sectors, incredible stuff, and Mercer's Talent Trends report revealing that only 47% of employees believe their manager understands their skills gap. Shocking stuff. But the real treat was our conversation with Jen Allen Jardine from HS2. This self-proclaimed SWP supergeek took us on a journey from her adventures in New Zealand, where she spent 6 transformative years across airlines, hospitals and the Ministry of Health, to her return to Scotland working with the NHS, Police Scotland and the Foreign Office, explaining why she asked the uncomfortable questions like, but why is it that way? Among the gems we uncovered, why strategic workforce planning isn't about timelines, it's about connecting every people intervention across the business. Her brilliant use of ChatGPT as a hostile stakeholder to practice negotiating with skeptical OD practitioners. Why you should plan for 2 scenarios, not 3. Spoiler, the middle one adds nothing. Her top tips for SWP success, including getting a really badass sponsor, preferably your CEO. Plus we learned about 48 pregnant policemen in a dataset and why that uncomfortable spotlight is exactly what organisations need. So grab a cuppa, settle in and prepare to think differently about workforce planning. Stay curious, stay strategic and, most importantly, stay intelligent, folks. Before we get on with the main event, I wanted to remind you that Lightcast kindly sponsors this podcast. Here's a very well-spoken chap to tell you more about them.
Lightcast is the global authority on labour market data. By collecting, analysing and refining profiles, job postings and market data globally, Lightcast provides actionable, data-driven talent intelligence, giving HR leaders the context to make better decisions. The world's top companies trust Lightcast to deliver clarity in a complex world of work. For more, visit lightcast.io.
What happens when you combine 15 years of HR experience across 2 continents with a mission to bring organisations out from behind the 8 ball? Well, you're about to find out. This is episode 40 of the TI Collective podcast, and we've got an absolute strategic workforce planning super geek in the house.
Yay! Yay! That's awesome.
In the virtual studio with me today are my brilliant co-hosts Alison Ettridge and Toby Culshaw from Lightcast. Say buongiorno, folks.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno. And today's guest is currently bringing her SWP expertise to HS2. She's also the founder of a brilliant consultancy called Beyond the Eightball. Please welcome to the show, Jen Allen Jardine.
Yay!
Hello, Jen.
Hello. Good morning.
Would you do a lovely intro of who you are, what you're doing, and why you're here, please?
Absolutely. So I am Jen Allen Jardine. I am definitely an SWP super geek, although that was used in a lovely complimentary way. I'm not always sure it's super complimentary because I like to find the problems in organisations, and we're a very uncomfortable spotlight sometimes in SWP. I've been in SWP now for about 7 years for my sins, and really HR for twice that. And got into SWP because I'm one of these natural problem solvers that does the question of why? But why is that way? Why can't we hire these people? Why are these people very expensive? Why does it take so long to get people in? All of those questions lead you down to SWP. And once you're in, you can't get out because you see all the problems everywhere. So mostly I'm a public sector girly as well. So lots of public sector experience in healthcare and policing and FCDO and now in HS2. So corporate problem solver, public sector fangirl, SWP hardcore for the win. That's me.
Love it. Thank you very much, Jen. I think that's probably the best intro we've had for many, many episodes. That was wonderful.
For those took the words out of my mouth, Alan. I was like, "Oh my god, that was awesome."
For those that are new to the podcast, here's how we roll. First up, Toby's going to give us his market intel, talent intelligence news roundup thingy. I'm curious to see what's happening in the big wider world. And then Alison will be leading our chat with Jen, which is why we're really here, as we say. And I suspect we'll be digging deep into SWP in her world and why she rocks it. So, Toby, what's happening in the world? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, the biggest news on the world stage this week or this month is not Trump coming over, sorting out all the tariffs with the EU. It's the fact that the Talent Intelligence Collective One and Done Challenge was finally finished and announced, and we did the write-up, which was very exciting, very exciting. It was a hell of an endeavour, if I'm going to be honest. Judging it was really, really tough. And the winners were just phenomenal. So we had the winners were Patricia, Balaj, Daniel, Remy, and Barry. Honestly, some unbelievable entrants. We could have had, if those 5 weren't there, we could have had another 5 that were amazing, another 10 that were amazing. And there were some amazing entrants. Some really, really interesting elements around prompt engineering and the power of prompt engineering, but also some really interesting elements around the limitations and hallucinations. And you could definitely see some recurrent trends. So the fact that the tech talent was definitely skewing even when the prompt wasn't asking for a skew. And my theory on that is because there's more written about tech talent than anything else. And you see that with geographies as well. So you saw certain locations that are very hot from a capability center, global business service center type perspective, arriving as the natural winners time and time again from a location strat perspective, even when they weren't necessarily the best for what was being asked of it. So lots of interesting things there. The most impressive thing, I think, though, is the capabilities of the language models for visualization and for taking a lot of the grunt work out of projects. I think the next phase, you can definitely see projects where a huge percentage of that initial grunt work of taking the data, normalizing it, structuring it, et cetera, and then visualizing it and doing a first pass write-up, you can probably automate a chunk of that. Now, where it gets risky is I think that part looks really convincing. And a lot of people will ship that out the door. I think that's the terrifying bit for me equally as well, because the quality control really needs to be there. The ability to dig in and challenge what you're being told really needs to be there, because it's not 100%. The data points aren't 100%. The hallucinations are real. So it was an amazing challenge, and I was really blown away by the quality and the capabilities. But it's definitely one to learn from.
I think that I had a go at this as well, Toby, if you remember, and I refused to enter because I didn't think it was right, because I'm not a TI professional. But the what you can produce in terms of its ability to convince certainly a layman like me, because I do class myself massively compared to you folk as a layman with this stuff, it's insane. I was blown away. I really liked. I was looking at some of the entries earlier, Toby. I really liked Remy's, but that probably because it goes exactly down that route I said about being incredibly convincing, because it looks beautiful and it presented really well. But the depth of some of the responses is incredible across the piece. It really is.
Yeah. Absolutely. I loved having a look at these. I'm such a data nerd and I love a visualization. So I'm totally with you. And as much as some of those visualizations were great and lovely, convincing pieces of work, one of the things that I found really telling about it is that although there were consistencies, the actual answers or the outcomes were different depending on what points were put in. And I think there's a notion that if you use, or in some corners when I'm talking to people, there's a notion that AI will give you a right answer, an objective, quantifiably correct answer, as if it is a totally independent thinking engine that's independent of the prompt you put in. And I think some of those outputs were indicative of the different types of prompts that are put in. I think the best thing that you can use all of these for is they're great for sparking discussion and consideration and for people to come in and talk about the hallucinations and talk about, do we feel that this is kind of accurate? Can it spark off human thought? And I really loved seeing, I think it was Patricia's, was one of the evidence of what people are maybe thinking about when they put their prompts in, because from an SWP perspective, it had something about visa lead time in it. And I thought, I don't think I've seen this in any of the other ones. And that would definitely be for me as an audience, if this was being presented to me, one of the points that I would want to see. Okay, so that's the suggestion from the model. But what are the practicalities of that, and how might I use human reasoning to decide, actually, of those options, I'm going to take this because there's a multifactorial analysis of, yes, that's the best place for me to go, but how can I get all of this practical stuff in? It was awesome to see. I really loved it.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, Jen. I think the outcomes were really interesting. The people who had the best outcomes were the people that we would expect in some ways to have the best outcomes, because they're in the data and they understand it, or they've worked in quite advanced TI teams historically, and so kind of had these questions. But I think I really wanted to see and what happens if I was looking through a different lens? So I wanted to see hold on a minute, what happens if I don't agree with the answer argument come through? Because I think, to Toby's point, they're skewed by the amount of data that is around. Don't get me wrong, they're all brilliant, but they're skewed by the amount of data that's around on tech talent. And so, giving us and what happens if I wasn't looking just for tech talent? And what happens if I was looking through this lens, and how do I actually implement this? What's the reality of doing this, as a project rather than as a prompt? But I'm really, really interested on the amount. It just goes to show how important it is that the underlying data layer is correct.
Yes. And that you're parsing your data question really well, that you know what you want to know before you ask, so that you get an answer that's fit for your purpose. Yes,
but equally, you're also saying, I don't want this to tell me what I think I know the answer is.
Yes. Oh, no. It's about knowing your question and how complex your question needs to be rather than your answer. So having a really clear idea of, what's my problem to solve?
Yes.
So what do I need to know to make this decision?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually, because it ties back to what you were saying earlier, which is, why have you given me that answer?
Yes.
Why?
What does it mean? Double rainbow.
Yes. That's definitely the next evolution of this. So this was deliberately awkward as a competition in the fact it's one prompt. So it was deliberately awkward.
Yes.
I think once you get into a stage of multi-agents, multi-prompts, etc., you can start doing that. You can have whole loop-back mechanisms where you have one persona questioning from a finance stance, one persona questioning from a DE&I stance, etc. And you can. That's where I think it's really interesting from an output perspective, because you can start challenging this. But to Alison's point, I think the biggest concern I have is that you have to be really clear on the data's quality at the front end, because quite often with these reports, you look at them and they're citing entirely different data sets for different geographies. And so, and they're essentially comparing apples to pears, and they've just got no consistency across.
Apples to houses in some case, right?
That's it. You've got to ground it, haven't you? Absolutely, you've got to ground it in some level of structured data, or multiple data sources is fine, but you need to know where it's coming from, because you can run the same prompt 30 times to get 30 different answers. Otherwise, it's literally all over the place. I think where you can give it more free rein is how it interprets, the commentary it provides, that kind of thing, because that can be super useful. But the actual data element, you've got to know where it's coming from.
I think I completely agree, by the way. I think one of the more interesting elements of this is, if I was presenting a report nowadays and I was going into our stakeholder meetings, and, we've all been in those meetings when you present your report and finance will sign off on it and think it's amazing because you're doing a low-cost centre, and then the hiring manager will be like, oh, this is terrible, I want access to talent, or whatever it may be. And they all have a different persona. And where I'd be using Gen AI and the sort of tech at the moment is plugging the report I'd done and completed in and saying, now you have persona X, hit me with your questions. And so it's like that pre-prep for those meetings to say, all right, have I covered all my bases? Am I set up for this? It's almost at Amazon, we used to have an empty seat for the customer. And I think it's almost having empty seats for your stakeholders taken up in pre-prep by a Gen AI persona.
Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've used ChatGPT, which probably puts me in the Luddite model because I'm only using ChatGPT. But I've used that before to get it to take a bit of a hostile stance and particularly from the OD perspective, right? No offence to any OD practitioners, but that tends to be where we get resistance from SWP because we've already got this from org design. So having it take that stance of, so you're an org design practitioner, I'm an SWP practitioner, you're taking a very sceptical stance. Let's practice negotiating, me telling you what SWP is and how I'm going to convince you to get on board. And that's been incredibly useful for me to get it to take an aggro stance, because it's usually very positive, to get it to work out how can I start engaging these stakeholders in a way that's nice and safe. ChatGPT isn't going to fall out with me and refuse to do an SWP because I'm not convincing enough. So it's great for me to be able to have that kind of strategic stakeholder negotiation in my pocket to be able to start talking more effectively with stakeholders across the business.
That's amazing, because Gen AI ultimately is about pleasing the customer, the person using it. So
it's very positive. It's great for an ego boost.
The person convinced that what it's saying is right, and often it's because it creates a little wee bit of an echo chamber for the individual to a certain degree. But also it knows it's very good at predicting what the challenges might be. So you using it like that, Jen, is a great example of where it can be really powerful. So it's good.
Maybe I just like an argument.
What else is happening then, Toby?
I think we all just like an argument sometimes, Jen. What else is happening? So Saudi Arabia just finished its first Skills Week. Well, I'm saying first. It might not be its first, but I'm going first. Why not? Skills Week. A Skills Week. It's part of the broader Vision 2030, which we've spoken about a fair few times on the pod. But it finishes Skills Week. The whole point of these Skills Week is they want to try and have over 3 million training slots by 2028. And this is the phase 2 of the whole WIRD initiative. Hugely data-backed. So it's 8,500 skills have been mapped across 12 sectors as part of their sector skills framework. And it's fascinating. They are just trying to upskill their population in such a big national level. I find it amazing. Phase 1 did really well. Delivered 129% of planned training. Lots of collaboration. There's 14 private firms at that phase 1. Phase 2, as I say, 3 million trainings, 65 public-private entities. So they're really hitting this stuff very, very, very hard in a really structured, data-led way, which I think is fantastic, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
I love this news story. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're okay, Jen. Don't worry. I have talked about the skills strategies in the Middle East probably 5 or 6 times on the pod, because I just think here is a country that's taking a strategic approach to what they need to do in order to make sure that their labour force can meet what they want to do as a country. I just think it's fascinating. They also launched a skills classification taxonomy as part of this to try to get some standardisation, which I think was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I found the same points really interesting for me, because obviously for us in SWP, skills is kind of where it's at, and we have a lot of these conversations, but we can end up talking about skills in this strange, divorced, sort of amorphic way, instead of looking at, well, what's the task for those skills, and are we developing the right skills for those tasks rather than skills for the skill's sake? And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this, I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, so there was 8,500 skills across 12 priority sectors. And I'm thinking, that's interesting, because you're prioritising your sectors before you look at skills. Yeah. So this wasn't just 8,500 skills for the sake of skills. They already did some pre-exercise to identify the priority sectors. 100%. That's about what's the question to solve, what is the crucial gaps to solve with a long-term view. And 8,500 skills, honestly, across 12 sectors, I've probably seen individual organisations that have got 8,500 skills, which is really awesome, because what you've got then is a much more meaningful framework to be able to target those skills. And exactly as you were saying, Alison, the standardised Saudi skills classification across all professions in the nation, we would love to have something like that in the UK, so that we're talking about skills in a consistent language, because at the moment, we're typically not. We don't really call the same skills by the same words and the same language, which means it's not really transferable. People are mobile and they move between industries and sectors and organisations. How do we get a hold of that nationally? If we're driving a skills gap and skills improvements across the country, how do we do that without that?
Yeah, and I think it's really easy, because that's exactly what Lighthouse is trying to do, right? And this is never a sales forum, but that's exactly what Lighthouse is trying to do, is how do we make sure that everybody is talking about skills in the same way, even if the way that you refer to them internally is different, it needs to map back to something that makes sense, actually not just in the UK, but if that skill was in the UAE or if that skill was in Australia, then it maps back to something. Because we talk a lot about actually it's really easy to build a skills taxonomy. It's quite difficult to maintain it. It's really hard to keep it relevant in a marketplace that is changing at the pace at which today's labour market is changing. And therefore you've got to have some sort of underlying language that is common, whether that's in the UAE, whether it's in Saudi, or whether it's in Scotland. Right.
Absolutely.
Cool. Or New Zealand, right, which we'll come on to in a minute.
Or there too, absolutely.
Excellent. And okay, Toby, should we do one more piece of news before we move on to Jen?
Well, it can do. So the last bit of news, I'm just going to derail very, very slightly before the last news, because India is also doing a massive piece on skills at the moment. And they realise that the Institute for Competitiveness have essentially said they don't have the skills needed for the future because they've got just the skills they have within the country as a whole isn't what they're seeing shipped over there from global business service centres, competency centres, etc. So, it's India also, hat tip, looking at this from a national level, very interesting. But the Mercer report we're going to look at is Talent Trends 2024-2025, which is a survey across 1,800 HR leaders. Really interesting. The big trend shaping the people agenda, human-centered productivity, which is the combination of AI and the work design, which I think no great surprise there. Productivity is really under the microscope at the moment. The elements I think are quite interesting that came through are trust and equity, cultural resilience, and establishing a digital-first framework for 2025. Some really interesting bits there, particularly for me around trust. I think you're seeing a lot of employees not really trusting their leadership at the moment, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays through. The bits that really came out for me, though, from a talent intelligence, people analytics, SWP perspective, one of the core ones was only 47% of employees say their manager understands their current skills and skills gaps, which is shocking, if I'm going to be honest. That's quite terrifying. They saw 42% of HR leaders plan to identify burnout risk, and actual adoption rate remains flat since 2022. So that's in itself quite telling that burnout really isn't being taken as seriously as I think it should be. We've had many conversations on here around burnout and mental health, etc. It really seems to have been taking a backseat since 2022, and it's a real shame. And then the ever-enduring topic, employees who stay receive, on average, base salary increases of 5.6%, including off-cycle adjustments, whereas job changers received an average of 16.4% increase, so nearly 3 times more. So once again, if you stay and you're loyal, it's not really rewarded, which is interesting, particularly if we're looking at kind of the skills development, internal mobility. People are being invested into from a skills perspective potentially, but they're not being financially rewarded for that.
Absolutely.
Can I put my hand up as an employer?
Please do.
To put some perspective on that, by the way, we gave a 7.5% increase to our folk this year, so we were well above the average.
Nice.
I thought that was exceptional, because our research before we decided on that put us in the top 1% of businesses.
Yeah,
in terms of the amount we were offering people. So we felt that was very, very generous. But I think there is a premium to a certain degree that people should expect when moving jobs, because it's a risk element. If you go from a job that you may well have been doing for 2 or 3 years, where you're stable, you know you're going to still have your job in a year's time, 2 years' time, 5 years' time, because your company loves you, then move to another organisation where 3 months later you might get laid off. There is that risk premium, I think. So you should expect more to move to another organisation, and that other organisation has to offer something more tempting to pull you out of the current stable role. So I don't think that's completely surprising, but I think that probably those figures should be closer together than they are currently.
I agree with you, and I think I'm 100% with you, Alan, and you know, and I know how difficult it is employing people and taking on that responsibility and making sure that everybody is secure and happy, and it's more than just salary, right? It's also about work environment and do you get up in the morning and want to go to work? I think what's interesting is I just wonder whether there is a link between employers not understanding all of the skills that an individual has got, and then an individual talking about the skills that they think they have got in an interview process.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I'm glad you used that word "think" there, Alison, because there's often a gap between people's own understanding of their skills and the reality.
Yeah. Well, I think all three of those stats that Toby gave really speak to my soul in that Mercer comment. I think for some of the work that we're doing at the moment in HS2, we're talking about skills, and we're talking about how we verify those skills. And the important part of developing a kind of skills taxonomy or an understanding of skills in your organisation, you can't just rely on a survey of what people think they have, right? Yeah. Exactly as you're saying, Alan, because I could have a really clear idea of how skilled I think I am in something. But does that match with how am I deploying that skill, and am I using that skill, and when did I last use it? And we need verification from managers to agree, basically, yes, I've seen this person use that skill. If such a low number of managers actually understand those skills, can we rely on them for verification then?
Yes.
Or do how we assess and verify skills need some revamping? That's a big question for us at the moment. And I guess the last piece, because I am a terrible contrarian, I'll go back to that, but I am a job hopper. I've been a job hopper for quite a long time. And most of what's made me hop jobs, I actually have increased my salary every time I've jumped, but that's never been my driving force. My driving force has been the challenge and the task and what I want to do and ways I see I can develop my own skill set. If my internal mobility, my internal talent marketplace in the organisations I had been in had maybe had something different for me, would I have jumped? For the salary, probably not, because for me and for a lot of workers, so I'm a hardcore Gen Xer, I'm the last of the feral generation, but apparently, this is more important for younger workers, is the meaning, the purpose, the actual validation they get from work and feeling that it has value. So if our internal talent marketplaces could be better, these are one of the things that drive retention more than salary. People aren't just about salary. And for us, particularly in the public sector, there's always this push for, we can't hire because we can't offer salaries. Is that the case, or can we not retain because we don't give people clear career pathways and we don't encourage them to move internally in the organisation? That's the big question.
Massively. The talent thing is so important in most organisations.
Last but not least, because I'm a hardcore HR person, can I give a shout out for the HR burnout to Kelly Swingler and Dr. Joe Burrell? If anybody's wanting to link in with them, because they do great work. Kelly Swingler is really the HR burnoutologist, and she is looking at burnout across HR. And Dr. Jo Burrell's a clinical psychologist. She's just created the Little Book of HR Resilience, and it really speaks to the struggles in HR at the moment. So have a look at them. If you are feeling in HR and feeling burnt out, we see you, we got you.
I love that. I also love the term burnt-outologist.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Really cool.
Weirdly, I had a message from Kelly Swingler about a week ago, Jen, and we're looking at collaborating on something.
Awesome. You won't regret it.
Yeah, definitely. So we move on to the interview, Alison and Jen. I think everyone is probably waiting for that and clamouring for it. What do you reckon?
Let's do it. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Over to you then, guys. We'll join 100%. In as appropriate.
100%. So, Jen, you introduced yourself in just the most amazing way earlier, so I don't need to do any of that bit. The bit that I want to start with is you sound beautifully Scottish. And you have seen some sneaky New Zealand stuff in your past. How did that happen?
So I suppose, similar to what I was just saying there, I'm a bit of an adventurer at heart. Like, I like new experiences and a bit of a weird thrill junkie. And yet I also really like to be comfortable. I have family in New Zealand, as a lot of Scottish people do, down in the South Island, which is mainland for life. Sorry, North Islanders. But I decided I was getting to 30, dun, 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 and that's the last year that you can get a working holiday visa. And I was working at the time. I wasn't really thrilled with the job I was working in. No offence to those guys. And I thought, I'm going to take a working holiday visa. I'm going to go to New Zealand. I'm going to see what it's like. And I fully expected to probably be fruit picking, right? Because that's what a lot of working holiday visa people do. I would run out of money within 3 months, get terrible sunburn because I'm a Scottish person, and be back home. And instead, I landed a job within my first week. I was working, I arrived, I was still in a hostel, I think, when I started my first job with Pacific Blue Airlines. They're a part of Virgin Blue at the time, Virgin Airlines. And I ended up there for nearly 6 years. I was working in HR and making a lot of those connections. So when you're working in an airline, you're talking a lot about scheduling. It's very complex. We crossed the international date line. So we had flights to Samoa, which means you can end up leaving at one time late in the evening, but technically arrive the day before because it crosses the international date line. It's bonkers. It's totally crazy. And lots of complex stuff about allowances and people having to stand down after 11 hours, whether they've been flying or not, and all the issues that creates you. And it started to get me thinking about some of those bigger questions about resourcing and how we resource and how we make sure we have the right people in the right place. I went to health after that down in Southland, which in Invercargill. If you ever want to look it up, there is a very famous quote from Rolling Stones about Invercargill being a certain anatomy part of the world, which is probably the first hit you get. Lots of challenges staffing a hospital in a rural centre that's not necessarily as sexy as people would like to go because it can't offer specialty medicine. So again, lots of resourcing, lots of questions, lots of stuff about why is this how it is? And this is a hard to staff hospital. Yeah, but why? Why don't people want to come here now? Can we fix that? And that was my first introduction to SWP. Got poached up to the Ministry of Health after that and worked in Wellington for a couple of years, seen a couple of earthquakes. I've been on that volcano that's in the documentary in Netflix. I was safely off the volcano way before that. I've been in glowworm caves and everything. It was a blast, professionally and personally. Fully recommended and not endorsed by the New Zealand Tourist Board, but if they want to contact me, that'd be cool.
Do you know, that's so cool, because when I was first kind of looking at your profile and doing a bit of reading, I was like, okay, yeah, this looks like you went to New Zealand to go and get a gig for a bit, but actually it kind of started your career in many ways, right? It was like, okay, off we go, and this is a space, and it just, that felt, you know, at odds with what my expectations were, right? So you challenged it, right, in all the best ways. What's your definition of what? Yeah, as a kind of self-declared workforce planning geek, what's your definition of workforce planning?
So I think there's a big disconnect between what we call workforce planning and what is actually strategic workforce planning. And I am absolutely all about the strategic workforce planning because I think that's where the real benefit of workforce planning lies. And for me, you can have a workforce plan, right? And I've seen lots of workforce plans where it's a list of staff members and a list of movement, a sort of internal mobility index, or a list of people, a list of skills even. But strategic workforce planning is where all of that stuff is interconnected and you look across all of your people interventions right across the whole business. So it's full employee life cycle, every touch point that has people in it, because really no matter where you are, no matter how big your organisation is or how small or what it's doing, you can't do it without your people. You cannot do it effectively, you can't do it well, you can't do it cost effectively without looking at your people. So strategic workforce planning is about looking at not just what we have and necessarily what we need. It starts from what do we need to do? What is the promise of this organisation, the purpose for it existing? Then what do we need to be able to do that? How do we measure it? So how do we move from strategic waffle into strategic delivery and understanding and being able to tell our stakeholders, whether it's government, the public, our shareholders, the bank, whatever it is, how do we prove to them that we are doing that purpose, we're fulfilling that purpose, and we're doing it sustainably, efficiently, effectively for both the organisation and our people. We're not a meat grinder that's grinding out the people in order to get profit. We are creating socially responsible, fiscally responsible, environmentally sustainable businesses that are good for people and deliver the product. That sounds like a really high ask, but that's the promise of strategic workforce planning for me, which is why I'm so passionate about it.
And why do you think, because I listen to that and I think, oh my God, that just sounds awesome. Why do you think that people therefore label typically strategic workforce planning to a timeline and not to being strategic?
I think it's usually because we have a really poor understanding. I hope this isn't too controversial, but we have a really poor understanding of what strategic means.
Yep.
Right? We tend to think that, well, operational is the now. and strategic is the future. And we can feel really uncomfortable with the future because we don't know what it is. That's the nature of human beings. We live in the now. We don't really understand the future. And that can feel like waffle. But it's also oddly comfortable to talk about strategic as being the future because the future is never provable, right? And the future is always tomorrow. So we don't need to deal today with what is happening tomorrow because that's tomorrow. And, we can deal with that when we get there. So it's this weird hinterland of unprovable. So it's comfortable for me to say anything I like. It doesn't matter because it's unprovable. We'll never get there. And uncomfortable. I can't possibly plan for that because it's in the future and we never know we'll never get there. So people looking for certainty will define it as a timeline instead of thinking about the operational is nothing if not delivering the strategy. And the strategy is nothing if not informing the operational. So I think that's where we come down to. The problem is defining strategy and how comfortable or uncomfortable we are with looking towards the future and taking actions that are quantifiable in the light of that future.
Let me play devil's advocate a bit because I listened to that and I wasn't scribbling down fast enough to go, oh my God, I need to make sure that I steal that and use it again. So I've definitely listened to the pod because it was awesome. But let me play devil's advocate a little bit. How much of that is possible because you historically have been skewed to public sector?
How much of planning for the future is possible?
No, so how much of really thinking about strategic is also the here and now and not the what are we delivering to our shareholders and we work in 2-year cycles and we whatever it might be. As an organisation, our business structure does this, and this, and I have to answer to my shareholders. Versus in a public sector environment where it is possible to think differently.
No, you might think that. But the public sector actually struggles with this terribly because demand is not constant and unchanging, but demand is permanent in the public sector. So, for policing, we will always need police. We will always need a justice system. For healthcare, we will always need healthcare. There will always be patients. We'll try to manage demand, and the NHS, frankly, doesn't want to see you ever if it can avoid it. And we mean that in the best way because we want you to be well. But you will always need healthcare. So there's always demand, and there will never end up being customers going somewhere else, right? Because we need healthcare. But the funding cycles and the government cycles place constraints that are beyond that demand. So funding in the public sector is typically annually. So the ability for the public sector to look beyond that 1 year, despite the fact that we know demand is constant, we know the public still exists, we know we still need to serve that customer, we need to provide that service, we really struggle to look beyond the 1 year horizon because that's what we're funded for. And funding is definite. So definite beats unsure, even if the unsure is still oddly certain. So the public sector struggles with this too. And it's all about none of us will know the future. So there's a great book about that's from economists called Radical Uncertainty. And it's giving me great comfort because we don't know the future and we'll never know. And the future will never get here because there's always another future. What we seek is to get agility. And the best way to get agility is to plan. To have a plan and to have a baseline that you pivot from, that you change from, that you adapt from. You'll never get a perfect plan that fits a perfect future. The best thing you can do is plan and create agility that keeps you adapting constantly. Because our world is, that whole VUCA is a bit trite, but it is volatile and uncertain and constantly changing. So we need to plan from a perspective of all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And this plan will be outdated, but I'll do it again. And again and again and again, and I'll get more comfortable with that uncertain future through this planning process.
I love that. You're so succinct in the way that you put things. I was thinking we had this phrase that is tomorrow never comes, right?
Yep.
But it's exactly the same. How do you plan for tomorrow if it's never going to arrive? But you do know some constants and you can think differently. And, I just think it's really interesting. Toby, you're waking up.
SWP is like a muscle. The more you flex it, the stronger it gets and the better your response gets. It's not about once and done, ever. It's about iterating and getting more flexible, more agile, the more you do it.
Yeah,
I was just going to say I love that. I think the idea of planning for multiple tomorrows, because then you've kind of got an idea what might come, and you can switch to it and be, to your point, Jen, more agile, because you can be far more responsive than being completely blindsided by something that's a surprise. It's incredible and very, Really eloquently put by you.
Thank you. I think I'm a terrible waffler, but excellent, as long as it's helpful.
No, you're not at all. How do you get context for your multiple tomorrows?
So I think scenario planning is a massive part of strategic workforce planning, and I think that is the best thing you can do, is to do that scenario planning and bring in as many external pieces of information as you can to inform that scenario planning. So your scenario planning, typically in the public sector, we fail at this as well, because what we tend to do is financial scenario planning, right? Okay. So next year, funding goes up, what can we do? Next year, funding goes down, what can we not do, or what do we need to stop? And that's not sufficient. So your scenario planning needs to involve, if you can, look at your competitors. What are they doing? Look at the labour market. What does that look like it's happening? What are the skills and trends that are happening in other organisations? Does that impact you? Does it not? What are the expectations for the labour workforce? What does it want from you? As we talked about earlier, about your Gen Z and younger workers looking for something different, that they are not going to stay necessarily in one place longer. They're looking for drive, they're looking for purpose, they're looking for meaning. How do you adapt to fit all of those? This is all stuff that can inform your scenario planning. You're talking about hypotheticals. Involve as many hypotheticals as you can to get comfortable with them. We've got a natural tendency to limit those and to try to go for, again, we're seeking certainty in a situation where we can't get certainty. Yes. So get as much context as you can in terms of what's happening out there for other labour markets, for other countries, for other industries that don't necessarily fit just you, to be able to say, what does this tell me about global workforce trends, mobilities, economic trends? What does that mean for us? Use your then insight in your organisation. I think those will be more painful for us. I think they'll be less painful for us. I think that's less relevant for us. But I think this other thing is interesting to us. Go away and there's a huge wealth of data in the organisation. And I think, Toby, you showed it really well with the AI prompts for the talent intelligence is speak to AI. Source that data. Go check your data sources to make sure you're not getting hallucinations. But get as much information as you can, be comfortable with the uncertainty, and use your insider knowledge to decide how to adjust that data to fit your organisation. And don't plan for every scenario. Pick two. You don't have to pick every one. Pick two. Pick a most likely and a least likely, and plan for both.
Oh, I love that. And yet it's interesting because you talk about two, and I'm like, oh, I can't. That's the power of three. Why aren't there three? It's kind of like it's doing my head in. Yeah. Like, well, what would the middle one be? It would be most likely just as is.
Yeah, we tend to then go for a middle ground that's informed by those two, actually. Yeah. So we pick this extreme A, extreme B, and I'll go for a middle section. That middle section is then a forced choice. It's not real. Make sure your scenario planning is real. It's not just between two extremes and a middle point. A middle point doesn't add anything. Just plan the two extremes.
Let go of the three is what you're saying.
Let go of the three.
Get on with it. Goes against every marketing instinct. Go for it, Toby.
I love this topic, and it's actually something I'm going to probably talk about at the conference in Amsterdam in September. Is a shift from kind of the long-term planning to more agile intelligence, and I think one bit I'd love to hear your thoughts on, Jen, is I think there's two areas I think we kind of trip over ourselves generally internally. One is the data and data engineering and spending our lives doing data engineering and data visualization. And we spend so long doing that, we have no time left for the socialization and the pushing of this around the business. And I kind of look at it nowadays, now on vendor side, thinking we can put so much more of that on the vendors. We can partner much more closely to get so much of that kind of dashboard build or data engineering or data feeds, whatever. And then we can spend our lives socializing. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I'm doing that terrible thing with double on questions. So one thing on the data engineering and the vendor relationship, but the other piece also being the mechanisms. And I still feel like we have such structured, rigid mechanisms for planning, whereas it needs to be a much more fluid beast that's almost like always on talent intelligence, always on, where it's just permanently dynamic and you're just continually reviewing. And so rather than a quarterly cycle or a half annual or an annual cycle, it should just be a rhythm of business. You should just have an alert saying, well, these things are outliers, these things are changing, how do we want to move? It just feels like it's artificial at the moment.
Yes, testify. My hands are up in the air. I'm swaying from side to side because this is exactly what we need to be doing, 100%. So I think first on your data point, I think, so in my experience, what I seem to come up against quite a lot is that oddly there's this push for data, this real push for data in organisations that often don't have the data maturity to actually handle the data that we can produce. There's, again, I think it comes down to what I was saying earlier about there's this notion that data will give you an answer without you thinking at all. And that's just not true, because you need to apply. But like when you're doing your AI, you need to have a real good prompt and an idea of what you would like the output to do for you. Not know what the answer is, but how are you going to action that data? What does it need to tell you? And what are you going to do with it? Because data is only meaningful if you take action. Mm-hmm. And what I see a lot in organisations is there's this push for data, seeking comfort about, again, the uncomfortable unknown and the uncomfortable future. And the data will tell me, right? So get me data. And then when the data doesn't tell me and I still feel a bit uncomfortable or feel a bit unsure, the data must be wrong, right? Because it's not telling me what I need to know. The data is the data. And see where the data is wrong. So everything that I've done, so we're building some dashboards in HS2 just now. I built a massive dashboard suite in Police Scotland. We started off with 35, we ended up with about 122, because what we took was a data democratisation standpoint. Here's the data, here it's all of it, as much as you can eat. But in an organisation that doesn't have the data maturity to be able to handle that data, you'll crank out that data and nothing will happen. Because people aren't able to make decisions off the back of that data. And when they can't make decisions, they fall back on the data must be wrong. Yeah. If the data's wrong, then correct it. And the best way to correct it is to shine a really uncomfortable light on it and say, here's your data, it's absolutely wrong. So we had issues with our data. And aside from, yes, there's absolutely an issue here with gender identifiers, but we had 48 pregnant policemen in our data set. And we were able to say, we're fairly confident that that's probably wrong. Because we used sex as a marker and not gender. So we knew we were talking about these are 48 pregnant male police officers, that can't be accurate. And there was a lot of pushback about, well, the data's wrong. Yeah, this is why we're presenting it to you, so you can fix it. Yeah. So there's a place for wrong data as well, because that's how it gets fixed in your organisation. But really for me, there's a whole push for data. That push never ends. So all of the data teams I speak to, they get asked for more data and more data, more data. They put out data exactly as you're saying, Toby. They put out data, and before it gets socialised, it's immediately pushed back on, I need more. I need it split with this way. I need this extra demographic. I need this extra point put on it. Because what we really want is to avoid making a decision. And we want to stay in the discomfort. Accept the data that you have. Make decisions on it. Take one bite of the elephant at a time.
I love that, Jen. It's just, I think you're so right, because you can just get lost in the data, right? It's, can I look at it this way? And then you're like, what's the question we're actually trying to answer?
Yes.
Let's go back to what's the question we're trying to answer and stop looking at the data and going, what happens if I do this? Because I can't make the data tell you what you want it to.
I think this is where vendors can come in, as Toby was saying, about coaching, in a way, coaching the organisation to have better data questions.
Yes.
What is it that you're going to do with this data? What problem do you need to solve? What is your pain point that you need data for? And then a much more data savvy organisation from a vendor can give you the data that will answer your question. And then it's on you as the organisation to be ready to take action. At the moment, when organisations are driving their data asks, it's from poor question standpoints, from a place of discomfort in the data or lack of data competence, lack of data literacy, and then you end up in this perpetual cycle of just more. A vendor can then cut through some of that noise, hone you in your data question, provide you that data, and put the onus back on you to then take action. You're not having to argue about whether the data is right or not. You're not having to socialise it. You take action.
Love that. I've got a last question for you, which actually feels really bad because I could talk to you for hours. But the last question I've got is and this is a bit of it's a tough one to put you on the spot for. But if you'd got 3 top tips, or 2 or 5, but you can tell, power of 3, I can't get away from it, for somebody who is either new into strategic workforce planning or someone who is struggling to challenge the status quo in strategic workforce planning, what would you say to them? What would be the 3 or whatever number we choose tips that you'd give to them?
Yeah. I think the top tip for having successful SWP in your organisation is get a really badass sponsor. A really badass one. And they don't need to understand it like you do, but they need to be powerful enough in the organisation to pull everyone towards what you need to do. So for me, typically, the best place you can go, and I know this is ambitious, but your CEO.
Yep.
Your CEO needs to be behind what you do. Now, they may not need to understand it. Your job then is to convince that CEO of what the return on investment is in SWP. So talk about it in terms of what their pain points are, whether that's increasing your time to hire, reducing your attrition, having competent skills. Know your business, know your pain point, and then go straight up the chain to the highest sponsor you can get, because sponsorship is where it's at with SWP. You cannot fix an organisation yourself. You need a heavy-duty sponsor to kind of boot the organisation into practice. And that's for both when you're coming in new to SWP or if you're floundering, if you're struggling to get it off the ground. Check your sponsor. Get the strongest sponsor that you possibly can. And in terms of some backing that up, know your data and know your business. Get into the data and find the pain point. Either go in and challenge the pain point. So speak to your organisation, find out what your organisation is telling you is the pain point, and then get into your data and see, can your data support that or not? You may find a challenge. You may find, actually, that's not your problem. Own it, stand up to it, get your data storytelling good, and challenge that pain point. Find other pain points in your data and get a good data storytelling again around the business to tell them what the actual data is telling them. Be their data translator for them and talk about it in terms of real business pain. And I think the third point I would say is, if you can, start small. If you can, there will be a push in your organisation to get a whole org plan for absolutely everything, every skill. Get me a new skills taxonomy, get me data dashboards, get me this, get me that, get me an all singing, all dancing silver bullet that's going to fix all my problems. Expect that to fail. Try as much as you can to get them to start small. Use the data, use what you know about the external marketplace, make sure you've got all of that stuff in, and use a case study. That would be my top tips.
Awesome. Unprepped. Not a lot of kind of heads up of what you're going to do. Fantastic tips. Thank you.
And what a place to bring the show beautifully to a close. That was incredible, Jen. But as ever, I can never believe we're quite out of time. How was it for you, Jen?
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Captive audience to talk about SWP. It's my personal soapbox. It was lovely. Thank you so much.
Well, it's easy to have a captive audience when you are very captivating yourself. So, there you go. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, as ever, to all our lovely listeners out there. If you're tired of workforce wish lists and ready for evidence-based planning that actually works, share this episode with your leadership team. Whether you're in the public sector or the private sector or somewhere in between, I think there's some real wisdom here for anyone that's trying to build a workforce that's ready for tomorrow, or one of the many tomorrows, depending on which way we end up going. So thank you, everyone. Stay curious, stay strategic, and most importantly, stay intelligent, folks. Bye! Bye, bye, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Before you go, I want to remind you about our generous sponsor, Lightcast. Here's that well-spoken fellow again to tell you about their amazing product.
Lightcast is the global authority on labour market data. By collecting, analysing and refining profiles, job postings and market data globally, Lightcast provides actionable, data-driven talent intelligence, giving HR leaders the context to make better decisions. The world's top companies trust Lightcast to deliver clarity in a complex world of work. For more, visit lightcast.io.